Okay, today's lecture is on how we make history. Not as in how do we impact history, but what is history and how do we sort the past into categories and what counts as history and what doesn't, and what is the relationship between writing history and empire and art. So here we go. We're going to start off with a few theories of history, and then I'm going to apply them throughout our lecture. So keep an eye out for all four of these. But the key thing about this is that there is more than one way to tell a story. So many ways to write and understand history. The Latin word from which history comes literally means story, right? A narrative account of past events, which means we have to be linking some things together as meaningful in relation to one another, and we have to leave other things out because they don't fit the story. If you'll recall, this is part of what we did in our first metacognition assignment about telling our stories from two different angles. When we read literature, we can benefit from asking ourselves about these stories a couple of key questions. Who is telling the story? Who is left out? And who benefits from this version of the story? But we would do well to apply these same questions to history also. Instead of thinking of history as some kind of objective account of the past, it is always told by someone. Someone usually gets left out, and someone usually benefits. So we've all heard the saying, history is written by the victors, right? There's certainly some truth to this statement, but it's worth thinking about what that actually means. What do we expect from a history when it's always written from the perspective of those in power? Pause. Ponder. What happens to the histories of those folks with less power? Pause and ponder this as well. But also, remember that histories, whether they're from the perspective of those in power or those who are left out, remember that it is always changing. Not just because power is always changing, but also because our ideas of what counts is changing. History isn't the past as a set of fixed facts that really happened. Especially the farther back you go, the harder it is to say really happened. Partly because when we look back at the past, it is always filtered by our present. And not just our present in the moment we're in and the assumptions that we bring, but all the other present moments between us and the past that we are looking at. And this is also partly because as we learn more, which we're always doing, the information that we gain can revise our understanding of the past, right? History isn't just done by historians, right? It's a complex effort that's usually a collaboration between archaeologists, scientists, archivists, literary scholars, historians, everybody working together to make sense of the information that we have about the past. And when we know more, when we learn more, we revise our understanding. Sometimes that creates drama in the field, but eventually we revise our understanding. And the last part is because sometimes we realize that important stories have been left out and that our view of the past is incomplete without those stories. So, 4 theories of history that we're going to talk about. I'm not going to say that those are the only 4. That's certainly not the case, but these are 3 big ones. There's a simple cause and effect, which tends to paint history as a very linear process where this thing caused that thing. There's the great man theory, which is essentially that there are a sprinkling of extraordinary men without whom history just would not look the same. There's the progressive theory of history, which we're going to talk about in detail a little bit later on. It's not progressive as in progressive politics. It's progressive as in progress. It believes in the idea of progress. Again, not in a political way. And then the last one we'll talk about is historical materialism. So here are a handful of thinkers. This is by no means the exhaustive list, but a handful of thinkers who have influenced our concept of history writing going way, way back. So as we, as a people, however you want to define that, as we have developed a sense of ourselves, we tell histories. And there are a couple of key thinkers along the way who really influenced how we think about telling those stories. Thucydides in ancient Greece, he wrote the Peloponnesian War, and he emphasized cause and effect in that account rather than telling it in terms of divine intervention and whose side the gods were on, etc. He also tried to make use of chronology, human action, and a neutral perspective. And there's an asterisk next to that because he doesn't quite achieve it. He is Athenian and he tries to be fair to the Spartans, but there are times when his bias leaks through. You can see it. So that's Thucydides. Then there's Sima Qian, who was the dynastic historian in Han China. And he was the first person to try and write a universal history from documents. So trying to explain the entirety of the world and how it came to be, and not just from legend, but from actual archival materials of the dynasties that came before his time. And that goes all the way from the founding of the Yellow River up to the Han Dynasty that he is a part of, or that he's the royal historian for. Then there's St. Augustine of Hippo. He also writes universal history, but he gives it a very, very Christian universe kind of slant. And Ibn Khaldun. So he actually reversed a lot of what Augustine did. Augustine really heavily influenced the Middle Ages and the understanding of the world in a very Christian paradigm. And Ibn Khaldun, he criticized the acceptance of narratives that doesn't include an acknowledgement of our distance from the past, right? Essentially emphasizing that the past is a foreign land and you kind of have to know the customs and the traditions of the foreign land in order to even begin to understand, right? And that was a really, really important development, and that happened quite a bit later on. The other thing he did is he kind of introduced empiricism or scientific method into the study of history, which essentially means that he really emphasized going on evidence that we have, material, documentary, etc., instead of just accepting the stories that we've always been told. Right? So taking the stories and then putting them next to, you might say, facts. And we're going to get a chance to talk about how that emerged during the Islamic Golden Age, which Ibn Khaldun is a part of. But that's a good enough sketch for now. So that's our introduction. Short introduction today. And then we have 2 more pieces. So I'm going to stop our first recording here.